The Democratic Republic of Congo's long road towards presidential elections was set to reach a key stage today with the publication of officially vetted candidates for the December 23rd poll. The list is set to confirm the exclusion of former warlord Jean-Pierre Bemba and opposition leader Moise Katumbi. For an in-depth look at the latest developments around the DRC elections, we are now joined in studio by Ida Sawyer, Deputy Director of Human Rights Watch Africa Division. Ida, thank you so much for joining us on The Globe. Now, let's talk about the purpose of your visit to South Africa. You arrived on Sunday. Just tell us more about the roundtable discussion that you had in Johannesburg.
So I'm here in Johannesburg this week with a group of Congolese activists to talk about what's happening now in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and especially as we move towards this December 23rd date when elections are scheduled. Congo has been going through a serious political crisis since over the past 3 years, as elections have repeatedly been delayed beyond the end of President Joseph Kabila's constitutionally mandated two-term limit in 2016. And as these elections have been delayed, we've seen a series of really horrific human rights and humanitarian consequences across the country. Activist and political opposition leaders and supporters have been systematically repressed. Peaceful demonstrations have been cracked down on, with security forces firing on demonstrators. We've documented at least 300 people who've been killed during these peaceful protests. Hundreds of activists and opposition supporters have been thrown in jail, and media outlets close to the opposition have been shut down. So a lot of political repression. And on top of that, we still have a really serious security crisis, especially in the eastern part of the country and in the central Kasai region. Dozens of armed groups still active, and they, together with security forces, are attacking civilians, massacres, mass rapes, recruitment of children. Today, 4.5 million people are displaced in Congo. Over 100,000 have fled to neighboring countries since the start of the year. And much of this humanitarian situation is linked to the broader political crisis. So we're here this week to really push for the upcoming elections to be credible and transparent and inclusive and peaceful. And we believe that this is a key way to set the new stage for a new system of governance in Congo if credible elections can go forward, and to allow for a system of governments built on the rule of law and respect for human rights. But we're still a very far way from that.
Is the DRC conducive for elections to take place in December?
Today, we are very far from a situation conducive to credible, peaceful elections. And what the Congolese activists who are also here this week, and what we have been telling during the roundtable and in meetings with South African officials and others, is that at least there are 10 key conditions that the activists and we at Human Rights Watch feel are necessary for these elections to be credible.
Can you just mention a few of those?
Just a few of them. I mean, one of the big issues around this controversial electronic voting machine, which the Electoral Commission has insisted on using. It's untested in Congo, and many fear that it could be used to facilitate fraud. There are also problems with the voter roll. There are some 6 million voters who registered without fingerprints and are suspected to be fictitious voters. That could be used also to facilitate fraud. A number of political prisoners and activists are still in detention. Lack of transparency in the judicial system and the Electoral Commission. So a lot of concerns as we go towards this December 23rd date.
Now, what's your take on the DRC Electoral Commission finalizing the candidates list, and with certain figures who are still barred from entering the elections?
I think this is really just another example of how President Kabila and those around him have full control over the entire process. And we've seen in the publication of this list, a number of key candidates have been what seems to be arbitrarily excluded from the list. One candidate wasn't even allowed to enter the country to file his candidacy. And this just shows yet again that they're trying to control how this election goes forward to ensure a victory for their ruling party.
Now, some opposition leaders met with the African National Congress leadership in the country. And what do you make of that engagement?
I think it was a significant meeting, and the press release that came after, which showed clearly that the ANC is committed to supporting credible, peaceful, inclusive elections in Congo and working to prevent further instability and chaos if these credible elections aren't organized, and a commitment to work with the South African government to help make this happen and to ensure that the South African government can play a role in pressing President Kabila and Congolese authorities to make the necessary concessions and steps to ensure these elections are credible.
In terms of the role of South Africa's government, and then there's also the SADC community, you know, the AU, what do you think needs to happen coming from their side with regards to assisting the DRC in ensuring that there's peaceful, credible elections on December the 23rd?
So we have seen renewed engagement from South Africa and other SADC leaders in recent months, putting pressure on President Kabila and Congolese authorities to ensure that these elections happen. And I think that pressure, that engagement is in part what led President Kabila to accept that he will not try to run again for an unconstitutional third term, and I think that's encouraging. But right now what we need to see is continued, sustained, strong engagement from South Africa and other SADC leaders to ensure that the rest of the necessary steps take place to make sure these elections are indeed credible. And if we see more delays or fraudulent, repressive, chaotic elections, there are real risks of just seeing further violence and instability and chaos, which could have broader repercussions across the wider region.
Worst case scenario for the DRC, elections go sideways. What would happen? Would the country erupt?
There is a real possibility that we would see large-scale violence and instability across Congo, but then potentially impacting Congo's 9 neighboring countries. And in Congo, we've seen over the years, it's a huge country in Central Africa, and what happens there often has many ripple effects across the region. So the risks are very real, but there is time to act now to ensure that these worst-case scenarios are avoided, and South Africa can play a real role in helping to ensure that happens.
In terms of President Kabila's leadership or government currently in place, have you been able to engage with the leadership or with the government with regards to the crisis that is taking place in the DRC?
We have tried to engage as much as possible over the years. Sometimes it's easier than other times, but we and others, partners who we work with, are pressing them to make the necessary concessions to allow the Congolese people to peacefully elect their new leaders in a fair, free election. And
what's been their reaction over the years? Do you think that, you mentioned the fact that it has been sort of up and down. Currently, what's their reaction to what you've come out and stated, that there should be some sort of reprieve?
Well, I think what we've seen over the past 3 years at least is President Kabila and those close to him have really done all they can to try to maintain their hold on power. And that's through serious human rights violations, repression, large-scale violence, and corruption. And there really hasn't been an opening to or an interest in reducing the human rights violations or holding those responsible for these serious abuses to account.
So far, what's been the reaction from, apart from South Africa or the ANC leadership, the reaction from SADC and the African Union?
There have been, in recent months in particular, there have been some strong statements from SADC leaders and the AU chairperson as well, pushing for credible, inclusive, fair elections. And I think these signals are important, but the question is, will they move beyond statements and messages to put real pressure on Kabila and those around him to make sure these elections are credible?
You know, just going back the past 3 years and the build-up to this current, to this year and the elections finally taking place in December, have statements been enough? You know, condemnation statements, have they been enough? Has there been any effect with regards to what the ANC has said, what the South African government has said, or SADC and the African Union?
I think the statements on their own, that's not enough. It needs to be backed up with real consequences, and we've seen targeted sanctions having a real impact. So the United States, as well as the European Union and the UN Security Council, have imposed targeted sanctions against top Congolese officials most responsible for serious human rights abuses and corruption. Some close allies of Kabila have been affected by these sanctions, and that's had a real impact. So it's the sanctions combined with the regional pressure, and then what activists and the Congolese people are doing as well to put pressure on their leaders.
Ida, thank you so much for coming through and joining us. And that was Ida Sawyer, Deputy Director of Human Rights Watch Africa Division. Timeline